Welcome to Rive, Reflections in Veterinary Education, a brand new podcast that has, we're gonna kind of get started. So this is our very first episode, and we're gonna see how things go. But first, we'll start by introducing all of us. So I will start since I'm talking. So my name is Bobby Connor, and I am a veterinarian, a specialist in emergency critical care, and I'm faculty currently at Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine. And so Catherine, do you want to go next?
Sure. So I am Catherine Fogelberg. I am not residency trained. I am a general practitioner in small animal medicine, did that for about 13 years. But I am more of an academic, and my real background is in education. So I'm excited to be here. I am just getting ready to start my new position as the Associate Dean for Professional Programs at Virginia, Maryland College of Veterinary Medicine.
Awesome. Eric.
I'm Eric Hoffmeister. I'm a veterinary anesthesiologist, and I'm a professor at Auburn University.
All right. So here we are. This is exciting. It's exciting to be here and talking about this. I think it would probably be good to share a little bit about, like what we plan to do and, kind of what our goals are. And then maybe we can get into topics for the first show. But Eric, this was your brainchild. So why don't you talk about like what gave you the idea and kind of how it evolved from there?
Yeah, I got turned on to Key Lime podcast, which is Key Literature and Medical Education. And I started listening to them, and it's a pretty entertaining show. Learned a lot. I've pulled a bunch of the papers that they presented, and I'm like, oh, this is good stuff. And I thought to myself, I wonder if something similar is in veterinary medicine. And so I did a Google search, and I found a few resources of like, people who've done podcasts for like, 6 or 8 episodes, or, they're like a part of another something. But nothing that was like, let's just talk about veterinary education, and like, let's get into that. And I thought that would be neat. And reached out to you all to see if that was something that, would be fun to do. Also people who are very passionate about veterinary education. So, we'll see how it kind of evolves. I'm thinking that, we hopefully will have some guests on, and we'll have some interesting conversations with them. We got some topics that we'll hopefully touch on. Maybe we will do some book reviews or article reviews as like a jumping off point for discussions. I think I'm imagining it being kind of freeform, but we'll kind of see how it rolls.
Yeah. Awesome.
What encouraged you, Catherine, to say yes?
Well, I think that we need to put a spotlight a little bit more on veterinary education. I think more people need to know about it and how important it is, and that there is, a discipline of education that people need to learn about. I think there's a huge body of literature in education and medical education, and an increasing body of literature in veterinary education. And I felt like this was a great place that we could kind of start those conversations. And also I'm an education nerd, and I love getting together with other education nerds and talking about education. So why not? It seems like a fun thing to do. So.
Absolutely.
What about you, Bobby? What are you hoping that we'll do with the podcast?
Yeah. So kind of along the same lines as Catherine, but kind of taking the flip side, I was encouraged, and I'm sure we'll talk about this at some point. I don't know if we'll talk about it a lot today, but I feel like a movement in veterinary education specifically right now. And there's a lot of people out there who are already like, hey, I'm kind of interested in this. They may not, be diving deep into it just yet, but they're like, dipping their toes in the water. And so it's like, this is a great opportunity to get people who just don't know that much about it, but are like, the idea sounds really good. And to have a nice, simple platform for like nerdy, passionate people to like get it. I just think listening to people who are excited about what they're talking about is entertaining. Like it doesn't matter. Like if you're like, I'm super into slugs, and let me tell you like why slugs are the coolest thing ever. I'm like, oh my God, slugs are the coolest thing ever. Like when somebody's really passionate about something, it's hard not to get caught up in that. And so I knew that, having conversations with you guys about stuff like I nerd out about this stuff too, and I get really excited. And so I was like, yeah, that's awesome. And the other thing I guess I think about with podcasts is if 2 or 3 people listen and they hear about stuff and they get excited that they otherwise wouldn't have, I'm like, success.
Yeah.
My bar is not very high, because I honestly, if nobody listens to this, talking to the 2 of you on a regular basis will work for me. So
well, that's an important educational principle. Set clear expectations.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, maybe I think that's the key to happiness is just having realistic expectations, honestly. And just being I'm going to be happy with this, because the process is fun. So yeah, so I'm super excited about this, and I'm excited that you reached out. And so yeah, let's get to it. So just to give people a background, I think it will help moving forward in the podcast if people know a little bit about us. And we shared a little bit about our current positions, but that doesn't tell the whole story. So Eric, maybe you want to start with what's the first memory you have when you're this was me teaching something? I mean, it could be formal or not, but when you think what my earliest teaching experience, what do you think of?
I think of when I was, I think 12 or 13, and I was a green belt in karate in my home school in Los Angeles. And my instructor asked me to help teach at a branch location that was just right around the corner from my house. And so it was easy to walk to. I was helping to teach younger kids. There was an adult in charge, obviously, who was running class. And, I was a 13-year-old kid. I don't know anything, I knew a little bit of karate, but, not much. And, but I distinctly remember that experience even to this day. And I was like, that was fun.
Yeah.
And I think that I just enjoyed that experience a lot. So that was the first that I could really solidify where I was in any kind of formal teaching role. Yeah.
Okay. I have a question. Where is green belt? I don't know anything about this. Where is green belt?
It depends on the martial arts style. So in mine, it's kind of middle high rank. So from green belt, there's brown belt, and then there's black belt in my style.
That's pretty close to the top. Then.
It's if you after 2 years of training, usually you get green belt.
That's pretty good. Nice. Yeah.
What is your style, Eric?
It's Yoshikai karate. It's hard style Okinawa, and full knockdown. Hit the other guy as hard as you can until they stop moving, kind of thing.
Excellent. Okay, good to know.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
I obviously know nothing about it. I know there are belts of different colors, and I do know that black belt, at least in the most common ones, is the pinnacle that I from whatever pop culture. Catherine, can you remember your first you were I feel like a teacher?
Yeah. So interestingly, I did not ever want to be a teacher. Both of my parents were in education. My father was an art teacher for high school for 25 years, was a fantastic art teacher. And my mother was a preschool teacher and managed a preschool. And so in the normal sort of child rebellion, I guess vein, I was I'm never going to be a teacher. That's you don't make any money and you have to go do all this stuff and you have to work hard. And it wasn't my thing. So I was one of those kids who was introduced to veterinary medicine very early and thought, I'm going to be a vet. Right. But as I grew up and matured and realized, life sort of throws you curveballs, I realized that veterinary medicine was really cool, but I didn't want to be a clinician. And as I went through my military career, actually, I discovered towards the end of that career that education was actually pretty cool. And there were things you could do other than teach in education. So I ended up really going and getting my master's in education while I was on active duty because I loved curriculum. And that was sort of my, I guess, what do you call that when you're into drugs and the gateway, right? The gateway situation for me to get into teaching and education. So I did that. And then I actually didn't go into the classroom because I was terrified of high school students. So I thought that probably wasn't fair. And I ended up going into vet school right after I got out of the military when I had finished my degree. And when I got into vet school, I realized pretty quickly that the teaching that I was experiencing wasn't great. And so thought maybe I could help them become better teachers, but didn't really start teaching myself and discover that I really loved it and enjoyed it until I got into public health after I had gotten out of vet school. I did a little bit of teaching when I was on active duty informally, but in the actual classroom, I just discovered that I really loved doing what I was doing in the classroom, helping students figure out not only what they wanted to do with their lives in public health, but also just giving them information in a way that made them excited about something they hadn't been excited about before. So I came to teaching very late in my career because of early, experiences with my parents, but it quickly became the thing that I was really passionate about. And even more so on the side of helping others become better teachers and understanding why they were doing what they were doing. So I think that's really where my journey sort of started.
That's awesome.
What was so terrifying about high schoolers? I don't disagree, but I'm just curious, like specifically, what did you find terrifying about teaching high schoolers?
Everything. No, I think, so for me as a teacher, and I still have this fear every time I step in the classroom, I have this great fear that I'm going to give bad information to my students, right? I prepare myself as much as possible. I try to read the information. I try to make sure that I'm not giving them bad information. But there was this like real sense of, I'm going to step into this high school biology classroom and I'm going to give them bad information, and they're going to go to college and they're going to come back and be like, well, Ms. Fogelberg, you told me this in college and in high school, and then I went to college and they told me you were completely wrong. And I can't believe that you would do that to me. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that was part of the fear. The other part of it was that I just knew how hard high school was for me. And I struggled with how I was going to help sort of steer students who are struggling or students who are unhappy or having difficulties. And I wasn't sure I was in a place that I was really capable of doing that for others. And then most of them were bigger than me. And I mean, I'm in pretty good shape. When I got in the Army, I was in pretty good shape and that kind of stuff. I probably could have taken most of them, but
you don't want to have to do that, though.
It wasn't something I wanted to have to do and end up in jail. So, it was truly everything about it. But mostly, honestly, I just didn't want to screw it up. I really just didn't want to screw it up. So
it's so funny. So as I listen to you guys tell your stories, so my first thought is different, but when you were telling your story, Eric, about coaching aside, I was like, oh, I guess I did that when I was younger, and I didn't put that together at the time. I talk now about coaching and how much playing sports throughout my life has influenced a lot of my approaches, but I didn't think about it at the time that was a form. Like, it just didn't occur to me that was a type of teaching. Obviously it was, that's like my ignorance about like just the teaching itself. But for me, when I really thought cause I was like you, Catherine, I'm like, I don't want to be a teacher. I was like, I don't want to teach high school. I've been to high school. I know what they're like.
Yeah.
And so, cause I had a lot of friends that went into educate, went from undergrad that are going to be teachers. I was like, I have no desire to teach. This is the last thing I'll ever do. And it was during my internship that I was thrust into a position to be teaching people. They were a whole year behind me. But
you did an academic internship then?
Yeah. I happened, which was just kind of by chance, because at the time the internships that were available that had a good variety of specialists, and a lot of different people, multiple people from various specialties that I can learn. I was like, oh, they tended to be at universities, where that's changed quite a bit now. But so it wasn't because I had any plans to end up teaching or at a university setting, but there I was, and in the emergency service in particular, which is obviously where I ended up. But at the time, we didn't have a criticalist when I first started my internship, and it would be me and a bunch of students running which is sort of terrible and dangerous sounding. And
terrifying.
Got it right. But I like DR. And so all these students that are terrified, and I was able to, be like, all right, well, there's no use panicking about a case if it's not here. The anticipatory fear is like one of the funniest things for me on emergency. I was like, well, whatever they said it's going to be, that's the one thing it's not going to be. So there's no use trying to worry about these kinds of things. But when we had downtime, I would try to do rounds. I was like, all right, what do I know? And I realized really quickly a couple of things. One, it's a great way to really find out what you do and don't understand. And it would force me to I need to learn this better. I need to understand this better in order to explain it to other people. But also, I had instances where students would kind of give me feedback and say, we really thought we were going to hate our time on emergency. And, while we don't necessarily love emergency, it definitely went a lot better than we thought it was going to. And, we appreciate, the time and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool.
Wow. You like get that affirmation.
Yeah. Like it was super powerful. And, and that's just, I was just trying to do stuff like, all right, what can we learn? What can we talk about? And, I also like, I'm a super nerd about just veterinary medicine. I just get excited, like, oh, isn't this the coolest thing that we're doing? And I think getting to share that with people is really powerful and kind of affirming for me. So yeah, that was where I was like, I guess maybe this is what I want to do. So like past me, I was like, you were wrong. You're going to teach. And so then at that point on, I very conscientiously tried to stay in university settings because teaching became one of the big drivers for what I wanted to do with my career.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I was like, teach. No, that's ridiculous. That sounds terrible. And nobody appreciates you and blah, 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 all of that.
Yeah.
So I wonder if you had gone to a private practice internship, like, do you ever do like a sliding doors kind of mental exercise? Like what would have happened?
I don't like, I'm the kind of person I've made a decision and that's it. I'm done. Moving on.
That's fantastic. I wish I was that way.
Like I've actually never considered like, what if I had gone or like, I don't know. I was like, here I am. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah.
I mean, I can certainly do that thought experiment right now while we're talking. And, yeah, I mean, I probably would be doing something different right now. And I'd like to think I'd be pretty darn happy doing that. But I also really, really like what I'm doing now. And, certainly things have evolved, but yeah, no, I don't do that. I'm like, all right, this is my path now. The other paths have disappeared. They never existed for me. That's weird. I don't know. I guess back at you. Do you guys ever think like, was there a turning point in your life that you're like, if I had gone differently?
Oh yeah. All the time.
Oh no.
All the time. I wish I was more like you.
I don't know what
bad thing to do.
I mean, maybe I should do a little more self-reflection in situations. We'll get into those in other shows in the future.
Yeah.
There you go.
We'll bring a psychologist on. Okay. So that's kind of where we all started. So Eric was very early on, was like, this is something I'm into. Catherine, you like maybe subconsciously had all that exposure, but like, resisted it for a long time. But so like, when you think about when you started like formally teaching, right? Like, okay, now I'm teaching and we can think about in veterinary medicine, like how have things changed or how have things evolved for you at that point? Like what changed? We're like, I think I kind of want to do this. And you're like, oh, now I'm doing it like formally, legitimately, like that's part of my actual job description. How did things change for you at that point? You want to start, Catherine?
Sure. So I actually think that my teaching style started evolving as a student because I sat in classrooms and realized what I 100% did not want to do and what did not work for me. And I had maybe a handful of really good professors in veterinary school that I was like, oh, that seems like something if I was going to be a teacher that I would want to do. So I think I was thinking about it, before I actually really started teaching, because I did have that master's before I went into vet ed. And so I kind of had a frame of reference there. But once I got into the classroom, I think I was very much like, I'm going to do it my way because I know that the ways that I've been taught did not work. And they specifically did not work for me, which sounds really egocentric, but that's what we do, right? We do either what works for us or what seemed to work for other people in our situation. So I was very active learning based. I was very much about students needed to come into the classroom prepared. They needed to do these things because I was not going to stand up there and read to my students. It felt to me like that was the one thing that was so frustrating to me, was that I was paying all this money to go to school and sit in class and have all these professors read notes to me or read a book to me. I'm like, listen, I've been able to read for a really, really long time. I don't need you to read to me. I need you to teach me this stuff. Right. And so that's kind of how I approached it. And, there were other things that I think as people get into the classroom, they don't really think about it until they're in the classroom. Things like, how do I manage disruptive students? How do I make sure that I'm delivering the right amount of content for the time that I have? How do I make sure that I'm giving all of the information I need to give to my students, but still give them the opportunity to ask questions about things they don't understand and then go revisit that information in a way that helps them understand it? How do I keep them engaged? How do they keep them off their laptops and shopping for things on Amazon instead of listening to what I'm saying? Because what I am saying, I think, is important. And so as I grew in my teaching, and sort of simultaneously was studying education at the doctoral level, I was then I was more able to sort of talk about what I was doing, why I was doing it, and the fact that there was research to support it. So I had names for things like active learning or inquiry-based learning, and I could understand that I was doing basically a flipped classroom model. And I could talk to people about the fact that I was a constructivist, instructor, and that I approach things in a way that helps students really connect things to other experiences in their lives. And so that for me was really nice, because I was going through my doctoral studies in education as I was teaching. And I think that really helped propel me in my teaching style and helped me realize, okay, sometimes there's things that I'm doing that maybe don't work as well. And why is that? And, how can I make sure that it's student-centered without giving into the students and making them the people who control the classroom, right? Because there's always that fine line there. But otherwise, it was really, to some extent, just experience and understanding that I look back on some of the student interactions I had at the beginning of my teaching career and cringe, right? Because I'm probably not allowed to say this, but I was kind of a hard ass. And I was basically like, listen, you either do it or you don't do it. There's like a black and a white,
Oh, and me too. I identify with that so hard.
Yeah. And I still am, because I think at some level it teaches students things, right? There's deadlines. There are reasons there are deadlines. If I give you, 16 weeks, if I give you 15 weeks to do an assignment and you tell me you didn't have time, well, I know that's a bunch of BS, those kinds of things.
Right.
But I've also learned over time that there are times to be flexible, and there are times to be compassionate, and there are times to ask questions of students. When you have students who are struggling, maybe they're not struggling because they can't do it. Maybe they're struggling because there's something going on in their lives, and you need to take the time to sit down and do it. So teaching is much more about, it's more than just delivering content. It's more than just sort of opening up a skull and, pouring stuff in. And I think for me, that's how I've evolved, is sort of, again, I was fortunate to sort of grow in my teaching as I was learning it, as a discipline. But I think that, I was also able to recognize the shortcomings that I had and grow in the sense of being more compassionate, more flexible, and more willing to listen to students and figure out what would help each individual student be successful, rather than just saying, oh, well, if you all don't do it my way, then clearly you're not going to be successful.
Yeah. It's really interesting to hear you kind of talk about, some of the same things that you were saying. I think for Eric and I probably both resonated, and it's kind of refreshing, because you had a different path, right? You had a lot more of the background of the theory behind how we should teach. So I'm curious to hear, Eric, like how does your experience, like when you first started officially, you're like, I am a teacher. How did that change things for you?
I just have to reflect on something that Catherine said, though. I cannot imagine going through vet school having done a master's in education.
Oh my gosh, right?
Like,
it was painful.
Oh my God, I'm sure.
It was so painful in so many ways.
I'm sure, because I remember going through it. I'm just like, oh, well, this is just how it is. I didn't know any better, but actually knowing better. Oh man.
Here's the thing. And while that I have no doubt is true, and I can think back to, instructors I had that were really good, and really, it's hard to blame the instructors, right? Like the system really sets us up.
That's a really good point.
For failure, And so to say like, oh, these teachers, like, I just want to make it very clear. We're not judging those teachers out there, because the system was not set up to make those people successful instructors. And which is why we're here, right? Like that we're trying to change that. So just to kind of put that, like, hey, we get it. Okay. It's okay.
So yeah, that actually leads in exactly to my evolution as an instructor. I'm a product of that system, right? Like, trained as a clinician, like in your internship, you're told you're here to learn medicine. In your residency, you're here to learn a specialty. And then you get hired on as assistant professor. And it's like, here are students and interns and residents, go. And like, I know the language now to describe that, right? Like I had content expertise, but I didn't have pedagogical expertise or pedagogical content knowledge. And that's how we roll in veterinary medicine. It's like, you're a content expert. Clearly you can teach this, go forth and teach. So I came to, it took a while. It took, 8 or 10 years into being on faculty where I started to realize, like, I don't know that much about what I'm doing. So I decided to pursue, I had done a master's while I was on faculty to improve my knowledge about research, because similarly, I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing research wise. So I did a master's to improve my skills there. And then I did a master's to improve my skills with teaching. And I got it in sport pedagogy And my rationale and my justification to my department chair at the time, which I still think is genuine, like this was not a scam, is like anesthesia involves a lot of psychomotor skills, right? True. Like hitting a ball with a tennis racket is very similar to placing a catheter in or intubating a patient. So there was a ton of crossover with the sport pedagogy program and what I was doing with anesthesia. And so yeah, that was my first like actually formal education in education. And I just remember the first couple of classes that I took, which were just like intro survey, kind of classes about teaching. I'm like, oh my God, like I've been teaching students for like 12 years and I know none of this. And it was truly mind blowing to me to go through that experience. And like really interestingly, like doing a lot of cross-disciplinary stuff. So like the group I was working with does a lot of stuff with like expertise in sports. And so I'm like, oh God, there's all kinds of neat stuff about expertise we can pull into medicine here. So that was kind of my path. And so now I kind of like Catherine was, very much used to be like, no, you do it. And, not a lot of like empathy, I would say. And, I think that's something that I've really been working on myself the past like 5 years or so, and just like really working that empathy, trying to be on the student's side is kind of how I process it on a regular basis.
That's funny. Yeah. I think that maybe that's, if not universal, very common. Like when you first start out, and when you first start teaching, to be like, no, I'm going to set the bar really high and everybody has to do blah, 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 blah. Because I see the same thing now, like when I'm working with interns and residents, and we're just like with clinical teaching and they're evaluating students, like they're just like so harsh, you're just like, calm down. They still have like another year of vet school to learn the rest of this stuff. Like you're like, halfway through your residency. And so like, there's something just sort of natural about, setting that bar really high. And we're also, all pretty high achievers. And so I absolutely had the same kind of thing where, early on in my teaching, it was just like, this is just what you have to do. I will say, I do remember, without having any of the background, there were specific, things or instructors that I remember having in vet school and thinking like that worked, and thinking about like, why did that work? And a couple things stuck out at me. One that you already mentioned, Catherine, is I abhorred somebody who will just read the slides. Like I can't stand that for the life of me. I also know when I'm teaching, like how tempting it is, like how easy it is to fall in that trap, because you put the important things on the slide because they need to be, they're important. And it takes a while to kind of learn how to get away from that. So again, while I did not like it, and I tried really hard to avoid that, it's an easy trap to fall in. But the other thing I observed when I was a student was the disconnect some of my professors had between what they knew as an expert, as an elite expert in their specialty field, and what I needed to know as as the day after graduation. Yeah. And I can specifically remember thinking about like when I was taught how the kidney worked by a cardiologist, 2 thumbs up. When I was taught how the heart worked by a cardiologist, no, like why do I know what Eisenmenger syndrome is? Why do I still know what that is? I've
no
never
idea.
in my life seen it. But I remember it. And I remember like, I can kind of still see the slide from like years ago. Like, I remember that. Why, and so I remember even at the time thinking like, we need to be thoughtful about like who's teaching what. Well, I realize now it's not necessarily about that, but so when I first started teaching, those were some of the lessons that stuck out in my mind. And I was like, okay, like I really, really, really love coagulation. Didn't get it at all when I was a student. I didn't develop a love for that until much later. And it's really hard. And so I have to like rein myself in, like it's really easy for me to fall on that stuff. One, because you get excited about it, right? Like this is the stuff I love and I'm passionate about. And so obviously everybody else is going to be just as excited, and everybody's eyes glaze over and I'm like, I don't care. I'm excited.
You will be excited with me.
Exactly. So really having to like be mindful about, the content. So I was thinking about stuff like that. But the delivery, no, I mean, it was like, look at my fancy PowerPoint. Look at how high tech I am. I didn't have only words. I put, like there'd be a little, clip art in the corner. Like, how great that was. So, my standard for what I thought was good teaching. You used the word cringe earlier, Catherine, and I'm just like, the things, but I cared. Like I came with a lot of energy and I really wanted to be good. And that counts for something, that's true. But I've made a lot of missteps for sure along the way. And, I'm currently doing a master's in education psychology. And I'm thinking now, like I'll come across, some certainly like terminology that I'm like, oh, there's a name for that.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of things that I do now that I learned through, a decade or more of trial and error. And I'm just like, man, if someone could have taught me this a long time ago,
yeah.
I could have saved myself.
Oh my gosh.
So much heartache.
Yes.
But then I hear you talk, Catherine, and you're like, but I still had a lot to figure out, like you were doing the active learning, you were doing and you were still like, but so that there's still something for experience, right? Like, 20 years of experience as a bad teacher isn't going to make you a good teacher, but you do have to kind of figure some things out. And I think all of our teaching styles are a little different, and how we approach things. But I feel like I would have gotten there a lot faster with the knowledge for sure. And like you guys said, just maybe been a little bit more patient, a little bit more empathetic, and not that I never want to be easy, because I think what we're asking our students to eventually do is really important. And I feel very strongly about that. And I hold them all to a high standard. But like you said, it's how am I supporting them through that? It doesn't have to be like, for me, the best feedback I can get from students is not that they love my class because it was easy, but that because I challenged them,
right?
Like that makes my heart happy. And I feel that our students want that. Like they don't want it to be easy. They want it to be meaningful and learning the difference there, right? Like, oh, they just want everything to be easy. They don't like anything when it's hard. And it's like, actually, no, they just don't want to feel like their time's being wasted. And so kind of flipping the switch on that in my own brain and recognizing that takes some time.
Yeah.
It's a process. I'm still learning a lot of that stuff, and I still have to fight that urge sometimes where you're just like, oh, I don't know how I could make this easier for you. Or like you said, I give you 15 weeks. That was plenty of time, but why? Something is going on that, preventing.
I was going to say too, I think that it's important to recognize that we can still have very high standards for our students. It's not a matter of lowering our standards, which so many people are like, well, you can't just spoon feed them and lower. Well, there's, that's that whole difference between equality and equity, right? Equality is everybody gets everything that they need, or everybody gets the same thing. Whereas equity is everybody gets what they need to be successful. And I think it's really important. I tell my faculty when I was working one-on-one with them a lot that there's nothing wrong with having high standards. I recommend you have high standards. You don't want, it's the Pygmalion effect, right? Like whatever standard you have for them, they're going to reach, whether it's high or low. It's just a matter of if you have those high standards, so they do have to be attainable, right? So like you can't have the standard that everybody's going to be able to, place a cardiac stent by the time they graduate vet school. That's just ridiculous. But if it's an attainable, challenging standard, and then you figure out how to support students to achieve that, then they will love you forever and ever and ever. I mean, I have students to this day that I taught 10 years ago who occasionally email me and say, I came across this environmental, public health situation, and I thought back to your class and, the MPH, and I hated environmental public health, but at least I remembered it because of the way you taught your class. And that to me is like, that affirmation that you were talking about earlier, Bobby, it's amazing. But yeah, I think people sometimes conflate that idea of like easy and low standards and all these things make students love you. And that is actually not true. Students do want to be challenged. They do want to have to meet standards. They just also want support. And that's really the big piece of the pie.
Yeah. No, I've definitely gone from like, you're like kids these days, and I'm like, I'm not enough to say that, but and then you go, what am I communicating to them? And, kind of look back in and say, they need to meet me halfway. Right. If you show up and you put the work in, I will do everything I can to help you, but you got to show up.
And training the students. I talk to faculty too, right? We talk about faculty development, but we have to train our students too, because our students have been raised in the same system that we were raised in, right? This idea that you've got to get to the answer. It's all about the answer. So you can pass a test, so you can move on to the next thing. And it's all about black and white. And as we all know, veterinary medicine is different shades of gray. And it's not about the answer most of the time, it's about the process. And so I think that is one of the things, we sort of lose sight of that. But I tell people a lot, like my students for the first 3 weeks generally disliked me and were terrified of me, because I did go in, and I still will go in and be very firm, right? Like I'm not a hard ass anymore, but I'm very firm. And I say, these are the standards, these are the expectations, but now I say, here's how you can meet those expectations. And if you need support and you need help, please don't be afraid to ask me, because that's what I'm here to do. And so that definitely is an evolution for me, right? Not just going in and saying, this is what you have to do, figure it out, but this is what you have to do. This is why I expect you to do it. This is why it's important. And here are ways that I can support you in that. And I think that more than anything has helped me really become a better teacher.
Yeah.
Bobby, something that you said just made my mind explode when you were like, I was taught the kidney by a cardiologist, and, maybe we should not be having content specialists be teaching their own discipline. And I feel like almost the whole time I've been teaching anesthesia, I've been like, you don't need to know neuromuscular blocking agents. Like, I don't really care if you know what the MAC value is. It's like, I feel like I've always focused on practical things. And it's because I freaking hated anesthesia and I did not want to be an anesthesiologist. Like, I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. And so I didn't really nerd out on the anesthesia stuff. So I'd never really thought about that before. So thank you. I learned more about myself today.
There you go. Subconsciously, that was why. Because when you skip ahead 30 steps and you expect somebody, to understand, like, you got to develop that foundation, and then you can develop a love for something. Cause I hated coagulation when I was a student. I was like, a stupid just memorize these proteins, blah, blah. And then I was like, the cell-based model of what? This is more complicated, but still more beautiful. And I was like, this is awesome. But you have, it is incredible how, that you gotta realize who your audience is, right?
Yeah. I think back to, so we had, in my vet school class, we had, there's always those students who are like the top 1 or 2% of the class, and they're just, whatever they do, they're going to be,
they know everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So I had,
you don't like those people, right? No.
Yeah. And so I had this one colleague of mine, she was an older student like me. So we kind of bonded over that, and just brilliant, really worked hard to, like, beautiful, smart, like had it all, right? Disgusting. Really nice. Had a dog named the Weasel, which was awesome. But I remember one day we were in our physiology class in the first year, and we had gotten back an exam, and she was brilliant. And she's actually a board certified internist now. And she had gotten one of the questions wrong because we were doing our exam review. And so she raised her hand and she was like, can you please, Dr. Such and Such, can you please explain to me why this answer is correct? Because I put this other answer, and I've read through like 3 different textbooks, including the textbook that you gave to me. I've like looked at other people, I've done all this research, and I still just can't for the life of me figure out why this answer is wrong. And he looked at her and he said, well, you just got to find your way to the answer. You just have to figure it out. You just have to find your way to the answer. And she was like,
what?
Okay. Thanks.
Wow. I mean, for any students who might be listening, like that's going above and beyond. Like, I tried really hard to figure this out, and now and to get that as a response is so disappointing.
And so that sort of pops into my head when you're saying that disconnect, right? Like this, he was a PhD in physiology. He was a veterinarian, but he had a PhD in physiology, and he just could not get himself back to that point in time when he was not a PhD in physiology and he was not a veterinarian, but he was a first-year student sitting in a class being exposed to all this incredibly new information in complex ways in a very short amount of time. He couldn't do it.
He's at that unconscious competence level, and he cannot explain even what he's doing anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's like me trying to teach somebody how to read. I've been able to read for so long. I can't, I've tried. I really have tried to teach people how to read. It's really hard to teach people how to read if you already know how to read,
Speaking of the system, we talked about residency trained people, but on the basic sciences end, they take people who do postdocs and who focus down on this like hyper specific area of research. And then same thing, turn them loose on a pharmacology or physiology class.
I'm sitting in my pharmacology class and they're like, well, this is how you calculate the MIC and this is how you calculate the area under the curve. And I'm like,
never gonna do it.
And in clinical practice in 13 years, when did I ever calculate an MIC or an area under the curve?
2% of the people in class have gone on to need that.
I knew what they were, but didn't really calculate them.
Funny. So we've talked a little bit about like where we all started and kind of in that middle when you're starting to teach, but like looking ahead, like what are you guys looking forward to? What are you excited about, next, what's happening next for you in veterinary education? Eric?
Yeah, that's a good question. I just have so many research questions on education and veterinary medicine. So listening to the Key Lime podcast, listening to all their struggles in human medicine, and I'm like, oh my gosh, we don't know any of this in veterinary medicine. And I believe it is different, right? Like when they're talking about their contexts, like just the resources that they have, the difference in their demographics is super different from veterinary medicine, that they're training people that are going to go on to residency as opposed to training general practitioners. Like there's just so many differences that I'm like, we need to answer all this in veterinary medicine. And I think that would be super interesting. It's just a lot to tackle, it's like, I want to answer all these things.
Well, you just got to get to the answer, Eric. You just
right.
Just find your way there. Find your way.
So I'm hopeful to do more research along those lines. I've actually been struggling the past few years to dig up like abstracts for the anesthesia conference because I'm just not doing as much of that anymore. I'm just like, steering into the education research stuff. So I think that's hopefully what'll be interesting to me going forward.
Awesome. Catherine, how about you? What are your visions, either for yourself or for the field in general?
So many hopes, so many dreams. I think for me, what I'm really excited about is that I am in a profession that is finally recognizing the value of what I've seen to be valuable for a very long time, right? So I like to tell people I've been hitting my head against the brick wall for a really long time. I have this really deep, bloody scar on my forehead from it. But I feel like one of the bricks is finally starting to move. And so I'm super excited about the fact that there are more people who are getting advanced degrees in education that are also veterinarians. I'm super excited about the fact that there are non-veterinarians who are veterinary educators and bring their expertise into the field in a different perspective. I'm very excited about the fact that there is this wide open field of inquiry that is available to all of us. And there's so much data. It's overwhelming. I agree, Eric. And so that part I'm super excited about. And I'm also really excited about the opportunity to see if we can get veterinary medicine to change in a truly meaningful way, right? And I mean that in the sense that we are, at least in veterinary education and academia, in my opinion, moving toward we're on a very unsustainable path, right? In terms of the types of resources that we have, the types of costs that are incurred when you go to veterinary school. I graduated with $140,000 in student loan debt. $120,000 of that was from veterinary school. I cannot imagine these students are graduating regularly with $250,000, $300,000 worth of debt. To me, that's completely ridiculous. And so I feel like, and I may not see this in my lifetime, I hope that I do, but I feel like our profession is sort of inching ever closer to that cliff that they're going to be willing to jump off and really make a big change. Really looking at curriculum and how we can tweak it in a way that is meaningful and gives our students what they need without saying, well, we've always done it this way, or because I had to do this, you have to do this, or because I'm this kind of specialist, you need to have this kind of knowledge. And being a little bit more flexible in the way that we approach our curriculum. I think that the pandemic did a lot for us in terms of forcing us to realize that there are different ways to deliver education that can be effective, maybe not equally effective, but can still be effective, and can provide an opportunity for students who might not otherwise have considered veterinary medicine as a career to potentially think about it, right? So looking at ways that we can change our curriculum to make it more flexible, to make it more inclusive and accessible, I think is a really exciting opportunity for me. And again, I don't know that this is going to happen in my academic lifetime, but I think that we're laying the groundwork for that to really have a huge sort of sea change in the way we deliver veterinary curricula, probably in the next 2 or 3 decades at least.
Awesome.
That is very cool.
Yeah.
How about you, Bobby? What do you think about?
Lofty. Okay. So I have one teeny tiny little thing that I really want to do. And that is, I just want to revolutionize the way we assess students.
That's just a small thing.
Yeah. So I've had this dream for a little while, and it's been on my tenure plan for 3 years. So I still got 7 years. I've been fascinated for a long time, like even before I understood any of these terms, but like when I was an intern and a resident and involved in this, that I never cared about students learning the what, right? I want them to think about the why. The why is the thing. So really it's critical thinking skills. Like I want to teach students at the end, when they're done, with their time, is not that they have memorized the list of, differentials for hypercalcemia and like, good job that you have that mnemonic device. And that's fine. But I want you to be able to be presented with a disease that no one's ever heard before. Aliens come down and create a disease in a dog, and you can get that, and you can approach it in a logical manner and think through things and have a reasonable approach and a plan. Like that's my goal, is critical thinking, which, as we know, is really, really hard to teach and really, really hard to assess.
Mm-hmm.
But I've been fascinated for years now about how our assessment methods just don't match medicine.
Yeah.
And so, students, as you guys know, myself, I was the same way. Like, what is the answer? I want to know what is the right answer. And it's like that.
Oh yeah. They love having the right answer. Yeah.
What's the answer? And I was like, good luck to you,
Good luck. Who knows?
Yeah. But I think we have this tendency, again, myself included, when we're in the classroom, is to present things in a way that like, this is the answer.
Yeah.
And sometimes we can be like, and this is controversial, but here's the answer, and so they're coming in not comfortable with that gray area. And then they get to clinics and it's like, everything's gray. That's it. Everything. And they're just like, but you said, it's like, no, that's all
I lied.
And so I'm trying to introduce that into the classroom, but as you know, like testing for them is also really challenging. And, so I've introduced short answers, into my testing for right now, which is lovely. And I love reading responses and getting a sense for what my students know, but it's a lot of work, right? It is labor intensive. Mm-hmm. And even then, like there's concepts that I still want to get across, which is that you can do everything right and the patient dies.
Yeah.
Yep.
Do everything wrong and the patient's fine.
Yep.
Both of those are true statements. But what you're going to do is the patient's going to die and you're going to assume you did something wrong. Yeah. The patient's going to get better and you're going to assume you did something right. And both of those are dangerous.
Right. Yeah.
And so like, here's my dream. I want to create a method of assessment that's like a choose your own adventure style exam that like you can eventually follow a case and this case goes through, but we work into it that like, well, what are the statistics we know about survival in GDV? All right. So you're going to go through these steps and you did everything right. And 30% of the time that dog dies anyway. And like, right. And you'll go back and you'll question, what did I do? What did I do? And you'll eventually, get to a point in your career where like, I can objectively look back and at least what I know, I think I did everything right. Yeah. But that's a hard place to get. And there's still that little nagging sensation in the back, but like, but what if, but I want to get people comfortable with that now. And then also just, so for like a training, things are just going to happen. Like there's going to be some percentage of random chance in there. And then for the assessment though, like if I could build an assessment, and then the nice thing is because it doesn't have to be right or wrong, right? If we move into like competency-based scales and things like that, like here's a novice, here's what a novice would say in the situation. Here's what, somebody a little bit more advanced, if you're competent, here's what an expert would do. And we can rate people not on passing or failing even, but just say, hey, here's where you are in things. And, so yeah, that's my lofty goal. And I need some software genius to help me figure that out.
That's amazing.
But that's
Mike and I have talked about choose your own adventure type stuff for a long time, but not in terms of assessment. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I've done some of that in like presentations before where you can use PowerPoint and click ahead. And it's a lot of work to build that, like even one presentation. So I know this is going to be like a huge undertaking, but like it'd be the kind of thing I'd like take a sabbatical for like a year and just like build this. Like that would be amazing. So yeah, that's my little little thing I want to do.
Very cool.
That was very cool.
Yeah. If somebody is listening and wants to, you can take it and do it. I will not be sad, or reach out and help. And that'd be cool too. But if somebody steals that idea, like I'm sure other people have had similar ideas, but if somebody wants to take that and run with it, more power to you. Yeah. I share it with everybody I can think of, like, maybe somebody will do this.
Yeah. It's like me and my part-time veterinary curriculum. I was thinking about it today because I shared it with several people. I was like, what if somebody does that before me? I'll be like, that'll be kind of cool. Like, just, as long as somebody does it, that's the important part, right?
If you want a little help, like reach out. I'll happily help.
Exactly.
If I can. You can have all the credit. Like I couldn't care less about, but like if it happens, but you're talking about like, there are opportunities in smaller ways. Like, sometimes with internships and residencies, we can do things a little bit. We have a little bit more flexibility and starting things new is a little easier at that level, but lots to do.
Yes.
Lots to keep us busy for sure. So yeah, that's where we are. So we've got hopes and dreams. There's a lot out there, but I'm excited. I mean, there's a lot of little things obviously to do in the meantime, and just keep those kind of big lofty goals in the background. But hopefully folks enjoyed hearing a little bit about this, and having this background will be nice when we delve into future topics. And so we should probably share with people the email, right? So if people have like ideas for, topics they want us to go over, and,
or if they want to volunteer to come on our program.
If they want, we love to have guests on the show. So if you're listening and you're like, oh, I really wish they would talk about this. Eric, do you want to share the email? Cause I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher it and I got it wrong.
Yeah, for sure. It's riveshow@gmail.com. So RIVESHOW.
@gmail.com. Yep. So, send us an email there if there's something you want to hear us talk about, or if you have something you're excited about. And if you're nerdy about something related to veterinary education, come in and talk to us about it. We would love to have you on the show. And so we'll think of other things, and we'll get together next time, and I'll have one of you guys will take the lead on that. So I'll talk a little bit less next time. We'll pass the baton around and find the things we're all super duper nerdy about. But that was super fun to hear from you guys. I enjoyed it.
That was great. Thanks, Bobby.
I nominate Eric to lead the next one so that I can sit back and observe a little.
Okay.
All right. Then you're up after that.
Listen, there's a reason I did not end up being a music performance major. I don't do well on stage, but it'll be fine.
Comfort of your own home. Yeah. It's a conversation. Well, thank you for listening, and we hope we will catch you next time.